I want you to think back to the scripture reading that we had this morning. And there was one key passage. And that key passage was I was busy here and there. In other words, he's saying, I kind of got myself distracted. And your servant was busy here, there, and yeah, what I was supposed to have done, I didn't do. And he offered that as an excuse. But you know, there's no excuse. And the king basically told him that. There's no excuse. And that's kind of what happens with us. We get busy here and there and elsewhere. We put ourselves in peril. I mean, go back into the book of John, the 8th chapter. And in that 8th chapter, you see a story. Well, it's not really a story, it's an account about a woman who was caught in the very act of immorality. Very act. And those individuals brought that woman, placed her before Jesus. What should we do? This woman was caught in the very act. And those individuals, as you'd see if you continue to read, were more concerned about the antics of others, and that when push came to shove, they realized they were condemned as well. Jesus asked very simply, those of you without sin, throw the first stone. One by one, they realized that they'd been put into a corner. And they left. Jesus turned to the woman. Did no one condemn you? No. Neither do I. But here's what I tell you. You go and you sin no more. And see, that's what's called upon by us. We talked about it in class this morning. What's involved and how much is involved in the totality of our life. We can't think that we can turn to God one day and go ahead and continue to sin. By the same token, we can't say that we're in alignment with God and then get ourselves busy here, there, and elsewhere. I saw something rather interesting in a quote last night. And here's what it said. So, you don't want to go to his house on earth, but you expect to live in a mansion. That goes to the point of busy here, there, and everywhere. And not being of the mind to do what and be of service where God would have you. Another thought that came to mind, and it's something that came across again the internet. People send me things all the time. Focus. If you don't separate yourself from your distractions will separate you from your goals. And I guess that's really what we want to talk about today. Because in this life, there are a whole lot of things that distract us. Ricardo's whole business is distraction. And he makes a living out of it. He gets you looking here while he does something over here. But in the broad sense, that's life. We get so distracted by the baubles and the things. And we have only ourselves to blame for what we do. So there's a great lesson that we can take away from 1 Kings, the 20th chapter, verse 35 and following. And that is that we're responsible for what we do. And there are consequences for the things we choose to do. Consequences. Get busy here, there, and everywhere. Forget what's really important. I'm suffering the pangs today of what I did 55 years ago. That's what my doctor told me. 55 years ago, I was too hard on my body. Played too many sports. Did a lot of things. Enjoyed being a teenager and into my 20s. Running, jumping, playing. And it did something to my Achilles tendon. Brought about severe bursitis. And it flares up. But now that I get older, it flares up even more and even stronger. As we go through life, there are consequences. And what we want to do is we want to make decisions now that we're not going to have to rue the day that we made that decision. Go back into the book of Matthew, the 6th chapter. Jesus is finishing, getting close to finishing the Sermon on the Mount. And if you go down into verse 33, you see the following being brought out. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Therefore, do not be anxious for tomorrow will care for itself. He's not saying don't think about tomorrow. Don't have projections. Because the songs that we sang this morning are what we long for. We long for it. We have a desire to be with God in the after while. But we have to ask ourselves this question. Whether or not what we're doing today, what we're going to be doing tomorrow, draws us any closer to that goal that we want to inherit. Does that do it? People are going to do what's important for them. And if something's really important to you, you're not going to get distracted. Yesterday afternoon, I was sitting there and watching the Stupid Vision. Foot in a bucket of ice, rabbit cold. They asked me how it was. I got frostfoot, and it was cold. But they were talking. That's Adam and Linda. We're talking. And I go, what? What attention? I was distracted. I was watching something on television. At the same time, I was doing something with the tablet that I have. I was distracted. We get distracted in life. Sometimes we forget where our singular focus should be. On the overhead, you can see Colossians, the 3rd chapter, and verse 2. And what that basically teaches us there is that our focus must be directed above. For we have died, and our life is hidden in Christ with God. And so we should keep seeking the things above. No soldier in active service entangles himself in the affairs of everyday life. That's what Paul wrote to Timothy in his last letter, 2nd chapter, and about verse 4. If you're a soldier, you know what your job is. And you're going to be so locked in, so honed into it, that your eyes are not going to be taken off of it. We are soldiers of Christ. We sing the song, Soldiers of Christ Arise, and put your armor on. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about being busy here, there, and everywhere. And yeah, there's a lot of pressure in life, awful lot of pressure. Pressure to do any number of things. Pressure on the job, pressure with family. If you have children, pressure with children. Pressure. And they're going to have and play a toll on us in the long run. But we still have to keep our focus directed. In Matthew, the 25th chapter, first 13 verses, Jesus teaches the parable about the virgins and about the 10 virgins. 5 were prudent. 5 were wise. 5 got distracted, got busy here, there, and elsewhere. And when the time came, they didn't have the oil. They didn't take the time to prepare. And that's exactly the same thing that we need to understand. We can talk a good fight. We can put on all the things. We can don ourselves with any clothing that we want and how we ever want to show to those we come in contact with. But ultimately, we have to look deep into ourselves and see if we've gotten distracted, if our affections have wandered away, because we surely don't want that. We've spent time looking at Ecclesiastes. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, we saw that life is kind of like a relative cycle. The 3rd chapter really celebrates that to the maximum degree. There's a time and season, every event under heaven. But also what we realize, flip over to the 4th chapter of Ecclesiastes. Open it up and read verse 16. And as you read that 16th verse, awaken to the fact of what he's really trying to bring out. He's talking about the enjoyment in life. But he's also talking about uncertainty that life presents. But he doesn't just do it there. If you look at the 7th verse of Ecclesiastes 9, here's what he writes. Go then, eat your bread in happiness. Drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already approved your works. What? What's he talking about? Is he talking about life in general? Yeah. Is he talking about the inequities of life? Is he talking about the uncertainties of life? Yeah. And he does that throughout. He talks about fairness. And he talks about so many things. But he also talks about life is to be enjoyed. And sometimes we think, well, if I've got to stay prepared and I can't get busy here, there, and everywhere, then that through life and I don't extract any enjoyment out of it. No. And I think that's a failing sometimes that we do as preachers, as teachers, as Christians. We come across so stoic, so self-righteous, that no one would want to embrace what it means to be a Christian. What it means to be a Christian is a life of celebration. Doesn't mean a life of sin. And you can have fun and not sin. I know that sounds like heresy, but it's possible. That woman who was taken in the very act of adultery, she said, go and sin no more. You can't continue on doing what you were doing. And when we embrace a relationship with the God of heaven. What behind? Those things that were detrimental. Those things that caused us grief and aggravation. And those things that we shouldn't be bothered with any longer. Was it challenging at first? Oh, yeah. It was challenging. But with the directed focus onto the God of heaven and realizing what was at stake, my soul's salvation, it got to be easier and easier and easier. Really easy. No longer temptation. It's one of celebration. So where do I find joy in life? Do I find joy in life just by opening the scriptures? Yeah, at times. But Solomon also says, why be overly righteous? In other words, you've got to have a balanced life. But what we do is we're like that man who got busy here, there, and everywhere else and didn't really follow in on what he should be doing, what his major thought was. And we do the same thing. And we can find enjoyment in life. We can find it. It's there. I enjoy going to art galleries. I enjoy the world of sport. I enjoy gardens. I enjoy the beauty of nature. I enjoy people. Whether or not people enjoy me is another thing. But I enjoy people. And I love watching them. People are so funny. And we may go someplace and others would go off doing this. I say, I'll be okay here. Just let me be here. And I can do that for hours on end. I don't know how many of you know Sandy and Denny Shipper, but they are beloved friends of ours. Denny and Sandy went to their timeshare in Las Vegas, and they got bored. So they went down on the strip, sat down, and talked about the people's feet as they walked by, what kind of shoes they were wearing. That would bore me to distraction, but they found enjoyment therein. There is enjoyment throughout life. And we don't have to get busy trying to find it in places where we ought not to be. By the same token, we can get busy elsewhere and on those things that are good and acceptable. And we can get so enamored with that we also forget. So what Solomon is celebrating, he's talking a lot about the balance that life needs to have. And by the time you get to the 12th chapter, he talks about life is given to us to prepare for that which is to come. And to not get so busy elsewhere that we forget to prepare for that which is to come. That's Ecclesiastes. But you go, we already knew that. Yeah, we did. And we do. But we also need to be reminded from time to time about getting busy and sidetracked, that we really forget about our relationship with Christ. Yes, he could have called 10,000 angels. He could have. He didn't. He died for you and I. The horror of what he went through. Take some time this week and flip over to the various accounts of the crucifixion. Read them, and you're going to stand impressed about the brutal beatings. But I want you to focus on his being spit in the face, the crown of thorns being placed on his head, the fact that he was probably stripped naked, when he went to the cross. The fact that the cross probably was not all that high, which means there was mental torture involved. And the reason it probably wasn't that high is so that the feet would be able to have the hyenas and other animals come and begin the process of destroying the body. What he went through was beyond horror upon horror. And yeah, he could have called 10,000 angels. But he didn't get busy here, there, and everywhere. He knew what he came to do. I have to be about the will of my Father. And what the will of the Father was our salvation, yours and mine. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift, is what Paul said. Thanks be to God that Jesus did what he was sent to do. And he didn't get busy elsewhere. He didn't get busy here, there, and everywhere. He didn't get busy trying to establish a physical. He didn't get busy trying to gain popularity and notoriety in the world. That's following him because of his power. In fact, where Austin read in Isaiah 53, he was not comely in appearance, that men should seek him. He did not look the part, but he had that devotion. And that's what we're called upon to do. We're called upon to have that same devotion. We have a book that provides to us everything that pertains to both life and godliness, challenges us to lock in on the goal, recognizes that life's going to be challenging, that life's going to give us pressures, and life's going to have tantalizing baubles, and it's going to want to misdirect us. But we have to have single-minded devotion. Single-minded devotion. Olivia Newton-John sang a song. A little bit too popish for me, but yet the sentimentality rings true. The song was called Hopelessly Devoted to You. Well, we're not hopelessly devoted because we have hope. And it is because we have hope that we don't get sidetracked, that we remain locked in. We remain focused. Now, we didn't get through this lesson this morning. So we'll come back and we'll finish it up this afternoon, talking more about how even we get distracted, but how congregations can get distracted. About that later on. But have this carry away with you, that we have, because Christ did not get distracted. He didn't go here, there, and everywhere, but he came to do the will of him who sent him. And now we who have been joined to Christ through baptism must do his will. And if you're here and not a child of God, we'd love to study with you and to show you what it would take to become a child of his. But every time we gather together, we extend the invitation to any who might have a spiritual need. And so if there are any who have that need, we would invite you to come